everyone, welcome back. We are on our last review video for the Constitution test. In this section of the video playlist, we are going to be talking about your last couple of pages, where you are going to be looking at a series of 2-column charts that go over the U.S. government on the left side of the page and compare it with the Missouri government on the right side of the page. The reason we're doing this is because the Missouri Constitution test is going to be essentially a test over what is similar and what's different between the U.S. or federal government and the Missouri government. So we're going to talk about each of the 3 branches, look at some things side by side so that you all can better understand the similarities and differences between the 2. First thing that we're going to look at is the legislative branch. As always, we go in order: legislative, executive, judicial, and let's get started. So we are going to be looking at the left side of your page, where it has the picture of the U.S. in the top corner, and we are going to be just focusing on this left side here of your page. You'll notice that it is split down the middle. We are going to be filling out the left side of the left half of the page right now. We're going to be focusing on each of the different branches and each of the types of governments. I'm just going to put this all out there so that you all can see and write as I'm talking. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to write down at the very top, it says, what is the name of the legislative body? It is Congress. Congress is the name of the legislative body that we're going to write down there at the top. And then right under that, it says, what are the names of the houses and the amount of representatives in each? For that, we're going to write down U.S. Senate in the left half of the left side of the page, and we're going to write U.S. Senate and 100 senators, or just 100 people. I mentioned this a couple videos back, but they're led by a person called the President Pro Tempore, or the President Pro Temp, as it's sometimes referred to. They are in charge for 6 years at a time, and their requirements are that they have to be 30 years old, they have to be a citizen for at least 9 years, and they have to live in the state that they represent. The U.S. Senate specializes in foreign policy, so making deals with other countries. Right now, as the time of recording, Ukraine and Russia are in a war, and the U.S. Senate is deciding on whether or not we want to give aid to Ukraine, and if so, how much. They are the ones who start all the foreign policy talks. The Senate is in charge of something else. The reps are in charge of something else. So let's dig into them. Now we're looking at the right half of the left side of the page. So again, we're looking at the right half of the left side of the page. We're going to write down House of Reps. Right next to where we wrote down U.S. Senate, we're writing House of Reps, and there are 435 of them. They are led by the Speaker of the House. They're in charge for 2-year terms. And you can be a bit younger. You can be 25 years old as a House of Reps member. You only have to be a citizen for 7 years instead of 9, and you have to live in the district that you represent. They specialize in taxes and spending money. They specialize in taxes and spending money. So, again, you should not have touched the right side of your page at all. The page with the state of Missouri, the side of the page with the state of Missouri should be totally blank. Okay? If you goofed up, if there was a little bit of a question about where to write stuff, let me know. Call me over, message me, whatever the situation may be. Make sure that you're getting this straight before you move on to the Missouri side. Once you've got all these red information down, feel free to move on. Now we're focusing on the right side of the page where it says Mo legislative branch. It says state government at the top. What's the name of the legislative body? We call it the General Assembly. We do not call it Congress. This will be a question on the test. We call it the General Assembly. It goes back to a time of the Greeks and the Romans when democracy was being tried out for the first time. We call it the General Assembly. So we're filling out now the left side, the left column of the right half of the page, where it says, what are the names of the houses and the amount of reps in each? Now we're writing down Missouri Senate, and there are 34 of those. There's only 1 per district, whereas the U.S. government has 2 senators per district or 2 senators per state. In Missouri, you only get 1. That's an important difference you'll need to know. Presiding officer is also called the president pro temp. They are in charge for 4 years. And you have to be at least 30 years old, live in Missouri for at least 3 years, and live in the district that you represent. Now we're looking at the very right side of the right half of the page. It's the Missouri House of Reps. There are 163 of them. They're in charge, or rather, the person in charge is called the Speaker of the House. They're only in charge for 2 years, just like the National House of Reps. Again, you can be a bit younger. You can be 24 years old. You live in Missouri for a little bit less and can still be a House of Reps member, but you have to live where you represent. Okay. Skip past that for now. If you want to talk to me more about that, I'd love to talk to you about those examples. We can flesh out some of the things that you're learning about, but for now, for this video, we're just going to move on. Next, we've got the federal and Missouri executive branches. So we're flipping the page to where it says executive branch, and we're going to deal with the left side of the page first. So again, we're looking at just the left side underneath the U.S. picture. The head of the executive branch at the national level is the president. His name is Joe Biden currently. The requirements are that you have to be 35 years old, be a natural-born citizen, and you must live in America for at least 14 years. It's important to note that the only requirement of living and being born a citizen is the president. No other position has a requirement like that. We're going to kind of change formats here. The important things that you need to know are that the president can appoint people. There are a lot of different appointment powers that the president has. We're just going to talk about a couple of them. You don't need to write this down all word for word, but you should know that the president appoints people to the cabinet and also chooses judges. Okay, so you can abbreviate that, you can summarize it. The president gets to appoint people to the cabinet and choose judges. The other big power that they have is setting agendas in the policy. So for example, they get to recommend things to Congress. They give the State of the Union address. They can pardon people for any crimes except for impeachment that happen at the national level. And they're also in charge of the military as being commander-in-chief. So again, you don't have to write that all word for word, but you do need to know the basics of those 4 things. If you have questions, call me over and we can talk more about what each of those 4 things mean. When you're ready, follow me to the next page. If you need a second to write this down, pause the video and then move on. All right, the Missouri executive leader is the governor, and currently his name is Mike Parsons up here. They're also in charge for 4 years. To be a governor in Missouri, you have to be at least 30 years old. You have to be a U.S. citizen for at least 15 years, and you have to live in Missouri for at least 10 of those years. They also have appointed powers, but they do not get to choose their cabinet. All the cabinet positions are elected. I should say almost all of them. The lieutenant governor is also elected. There are a couple of small ones, but for the things that we're going to talk about, just remember that the governor's cabinet is mostly elected. They also don't get to choose judges like the presidents do. The Missouri judges are elected. They're also in charge of things a lot like the president is. Again, you do not need to write these all down word for word, but they're in charge of things like public education, healthcare, parks, highways. So they're in charge of things that are reserved to the states. Instead of giving a State of the Union address, they give a State of the State address where they talk about what's going on in Missouri that year. They can pardon people who have been found guilty for any crime except for impeachment, because that would go against checks and balances. They don't get to call on the military, but we do have a state militia called the National Guard that the governors can send in after a flood, or if there is a violent riot or something like that, the governor can call in the militia. They can also use a line item veto, and this is an important thing that the presidents cannot do. The governor can just draw a line through an item in a bill and pass the rest, called a line item veto. So they can do the line item veto, but they cannot do a pocket veto like the president can. And finally, the governors can get kicked out through a recall. That's another big difference. The president can only get kicked out if they get impeached, but if enough people don't like the governor, then there's a process called a recall to kick out our governor. So a couple more major differences. Okay, you'll notice at the bottom we left a couple of rows blank. So the major differences in the cabinet are at the national level, the U.S. Attorney General is the head lawyer that represents all of the American federal government, and the U.S. Secretary of State helps the president with foreign affairs. In Missouri, our Attorney General is the head lawyer that only represents Missouri, and the Secretary of State job is much different. They're in charge of elections for the most part. That's their biggest, most important job, but they also keep documents, and they're the holder of the seal of Missouri. So they sign important official day-to-day stuff. Again, at any point, if I'm going too fast, feel free to pause the video before moving on. We touched on this for a second, but there are differences with the veto power too. That's the last line on the page. The national executive branch has the power of the pocket veto. That's when the president just holds on to a document rather than signing it or rather than vetoing it. The president can just hold on to it for 10 days. The president may do this if they suspect that Congress might override their veto, but if Congress is getting ready to leave Washington, D.C., the president can hold on to it or put it in their pocket, and if Congress leaves, then the president can veto it after they leave, and then it will not be able to be overridden. The important thing is that they can only do this up for 10 days, and that is an important thing that presidents have to consider is the timing of when Congress is about to leave. It's a little bit like when a quarterback or let's say a center for a basketball team, let's say a sports team that has the ball as the clock is winding down, they're not going to pass it, they're not going to try and score again because then the opposing team might get the ball back and score. So if it's a close game, the winning quarterback might just hold on to the ball and try to run the clock out. That's a lot like what the president does with the pocket veto. Once Congress leaves, then the bill gets vetoed and Congress cannot override it. Again, this is kind of similar to my metaphor here. And again, you don't have to write all this down. If the sports metaphor helps you, great, write it down. If you got questions about what I mean, make sure that you're asking me. Lastly, the Missouri governor, we said they've got a power called the line item veto that allows them to draw a line through certain items on a bill that the legislator has passed and then pass the rest. So pretty unique to Missouri. And again, this is something that's different between the two that you're going to need to know. President Clinton, Bill Clinton back in 1998 tried to do this, but the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional at the national level, but they said states can still do it. I'm going to add this video into our playlist, but if I try to add it to YouTube like this, then it's not going to work. So I'm going to move on before YouTube's copyright thing catches on to it. But I will add on to this. It's going to talk a little bit more about veto power. I'm going to add it to the playlist later on. All right, let's give them the second scenario. Moving on to our last branch, the judicial branch. Okay, we've seen this graph before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You shouldn't spend too much time on it either because, again, you already have it in this notes packet somewhere. The important thing that we're adding here is the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court has 9 people on it. The Missouri Supreme Court has 7 people on it. And it's important to know that the districts on the federal side are, appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The people on the right side are all elected. Ones on the left are appointed and they get the job for life. The ones on the right have to get reelected. Okay, and with that, that is the end of our review. So if you have any questions, please come ask me. I would love to help you out. Remember that there are things like flashcards in the review folder. There are things like a practice test, which I cannot recommend highly enough. Everybody should take it because you'll be able to take a test that's very similar to the real test and then see what you got right and see what you got wrong, and we can talk about it. So once you're done with your notes, take a look at the flashcards, work on your study guide. Once you're done with the study guide, you can take that pre-test, that practice Constitution test, talk with me about your answers, and then you can go for the real thing. Good luck, and I'll see you soon.